in your piece, you describe how firearms ballistic analysis is part of a larger pool of evidence that's potentially questionable, at the very least, what's called pattern matching. This is sort of the stuff that you see on CSI and a lot of cop TV shows, where this includes all kinds of things, right? Like bite mark analysis, carpet matching,
Fiber.
all sorts of things, right? Trying to match screwdrivers to hold, marks left on a door or a crowbar or something like that. This is all part of the same category of evidence, right?
Yeah. So this is all called pattern matching, and this is this type of excuse me, expertise really starts being developed in the progressive era, where you had policing was becoming more professionalized, and so the idea was policing shouldn't be sort of a patronage or crony position; it should be a career. And so we want police to sort of specialize in various areas of law enforcement. And one of the areas was this idea of forensics. So this is where you start to get fingerprint analysis, ballistics analysis, shoe print analysis, and you get these kind of specializations that have kind of what you might say the veneer and kind of sheer of science or shine of science. But they're all kind of developed within the auspices of law enforcement. They don't come from the scientific community. And in fact, science and criminal justice kind of move on parallel paths for most of the 20th century, until the 1990s, when we get DNA testing. And DNA testing, emerges from the scientific community, and it starts showing us that a lot of these fields in forensics that we thought were kind of foolproof or certain or absolute, were resulting in wrongful convictions. And so then now the scientific community kind of perks up, and they start taking an interest in these fields and start, testing the fundamental kind of underlying premises. And so pattern matching, had been pretty universally accepted in courts, whether it's bite marks, whether it's, as you said, hair and carpet fiber, shoe prints, tire tread, anything where you're matching two pieces of evidence and looking at them and seeing if they're a match. And the problem with pattern matching, from a scientific perspective, is that we don't know, so I talked about the class characteristics, right? And these are the very broad characteristics. The characteristics that allow you to narrow it down to one gun, for example, or one set of teeth, are called individual characteristics. And these are the tiny microscopic marks that you see on a bullet that they claim, could only come from this particular gun barrel. Well, the problem with that is we don't know how unique those characteristics are. We don't know how often a certain bite pattern or a certain rifling pattern occurs over the entire population of bullets. And so we can't generate a margin for error the way we can for, say, DNA. In DNA, we know the genetic markers, and we know the alleles that are at each marker, and we know how often those alleles appear across the entire human population. So if you have so many matching alleles at those markers, we can say the odds of anyone other than the defendant leaving this, owning this blood are 1 in, 3 billion. We can't do that for any of these other fields because we don't know how often these characteristics occur across the population. And so it's all about judgment. It's about eyeballing it. It's about, for ballistics, what happens is an analyst will put two bullets under a microscope, and they'll have a split screen on their monitor, and they'll just look at the two, and they'll just
sort of the classic CSI setup. That
it's a match or it's not a match. And the problem is that we don't know how good they are at it. And the tests that have been done have suggested that, there's a pretty high error.
Well, so one of the things that you talk about in your piece, going off of this DNA discussion here, is that level of scientific specificity that you get with DNA is part of the reason why we suspect that other types of pattern matching aren't as rigorous,
right?
Aren't as reliable, right? Because one of the things that began to happen in the 1990s with the rise of DNA testing is that people began to get exonerated from certain crimes where DNA was, a part of the evidence kit that they could go back and look at and find that the suspect or the person who was convicted wasn't a match for the DNA in the case. Whereas during the case, they had used these different pattern matching techniques instead of DNA. And is that a good summation of how we understand that these other techniques are less reliable?
Yeah,
is
so
that
DNA,
why, or like what is it?
So DNA started showing us that they had gotten it wrong, and they had gotten it wrong in ways that sent innocent people to prison and allowed guilty people to remain free. And so what happens is the scientific community starts noticing this, and so they start running tests on the basic kind of underlying premises of some of these fields. So, for example, in bite mark matching, they ran tests looking at trying to answer questions like, is human skin even capable of recording a bite in a way that makes it useful to be compared to other teeth? What they found is it doesn't. Human skin is incredibly elastic. It can stretch. When you bite someone, in the heat of a struggle, for example, the person may be pulling away. How fast you heal has, factors into it. And so, they found that the two main premises of bite mark matching, that human dentition is unique, that we all have a unique bite. There's no evidence for that. And they found that human skin isn't capable of recording a bite in a useful way. And then they also have tested actual bite mark analysts and found that they're not, when they're given the exact same evidence, they frequently disagree about what conclusions can be drawn from that evidence. So if you show them the same alleged bite, in some of these studies, you found widespread disagreement over whether it's a human bite, whether it's a bite at all, whether it's a bite that's has been recorded well enough that it can be used for analysis. And in the scientific community, if we're in accepted science and you give 100 scientists, a question like that, and you ask them to apply existing sort of known scientific principles, they're all going to come back with the same answer, right? I mean, there are areas of theoretical science, or maybe that's not the case, but within the accepted science. That's what science is, right? It's predictability. We apply the knowledge that we have and we can get this outcome. If these forensic analysts can't even agree on what the exact same piece of evidence shows, how can we rely on them to sort of give objective, predictable, scientifically sound testimony in court? So within pattern matching, basically it's come down to kind of this idea of eyeballing the evidence, saying whether it's a match. And what juries then do, because there's no ground truth in a lot of these cases, right? Unless there's DNA, we never know for sure if this person was guilty or not, right? The jury reaches its verdict, but there's never a test, right? So we can't even look at a track record for these experts. So juries end up just sort of judging their credibility based on how persuasive they are on the witness stand and what their experience level is. And the interesting thing is a couple of responses to that. One is that the set of skills it takes to be persuasive to a jury is not necessarily the same set of skills it takes to be a good scientist or good analyst. In fact, they could be contradictory, right? Juries want certainty. They want to be told what the answer is, right? They hate circumspection. Well, problem is science is often circumspect, right? Science talks in terms of probabilities, in terms of margin for error. And so if you're willing to kind of, eschew the science and give certain answers, that makes you a less thorough and careful and conscientious analyst, but it probably makes you a better expert witness because that's what juries want to hear. The other thing is that, juries they have their own biases in terms of they tend to think that defense witnesses are hired guns, whereas prosecution witnesses are, sort of public servants and only in it for all the right reasons. And so, they end up using the wrong criteria when determining the credibility of these witnesses. One thing that comes out of these two studies I talk about in the piece that are sort of science-based studies, these proficiency tests that were given to the analysts, one thing that comes out of it that's really striking is that there's no correlation between experience and training of the people who took the test and their performance on the test. So you would think that if experience and training are what makes one of these experts more credible, the experts with more experience and more training would do better on proficiency tests. And that there's no data to suggest that. Which again suggests that it's sort of more about subjectivity and kind of eyeballing it than it is about actual science.